Hello and welcome to Ask Lovecraft After Dark. Tonight I am joined by a really good friend of mine, KT Bryski. Welcome, Katie.
Hi, thank you for having me.
So Katie and I, full disclosure, knew each other from when we both were at the same church in Toronto a number of years ago. Katie were you the choir there? Were you part of that crowd?
Yep.
The cool choir
Still,
crowd?
still, I'm
Excellent.
like the choir crowd has gotten even cooler the last couple of
Dang.
years.
Oh, nice. That is fantastic.
It's like it's a whole thing now. We're like 1 minute away from getting jackets. It's really cool.
Once jackets get involved, things are very serious. But Katie and I also kept running into each other in the literary scene. I would see you at Maca Phoenix doing sort of book stuff, and I think you were friends with some of the same folks in the Chai Zine and Chai series. Is that
Yeah,
correct?
yeah.
So yeah, I got to know you through that fun world.
And podcasting too. We had some mutuals in common through that.
And I feel like at various points I came pestering you for audio like questions and editing questions when I was starting to begin to veer into the podcasting world.
And I pestered you for stuff. So that was a reciprocal, beautiful friendship.
Yay for mutual pestering. The work that I was familiar with at the time, you were writing a lot of fantasy, and I understand that your writing has moved on into other sort of fun, exciting fields. You just have been part of this exciting new Bracken anthology, where you wrote a really creepy vampire story. So can you talk to us about that and how you transitioned into this world of lyrical fiction?
Yeah, so it still is fantasy, I think. Well, it is fantasy.
Fantastical.
Yeah, but it's kind of veered into this more like fabulism, lyricism. So it's almost like Canlit and fantasy had a beautiful, weird child together.
We're gonna need to discuss the genetics behind that.
A little bit. Yeah, I think some of it was just, I mean, especially when we're in the church in Toronto, like I was still very young and still kind of figuring myself out as a person and as an artist. So in between then and now, like I did my master's in creative writing, and I feel like I got much more into the short fiction world in particular. So I got exposed to more styles than I had been previously. So this kind of evolved out of it. And that seems to be my main jam is angsty fairy tales mostly.
Oh, okay.
With like a dash of Canlit.
All right. So how does the Canlit creep in? Is that just for like tax write-off purposes or what?
I mean, partly. Let's be real. No, I think it's also an aesthetic, though. I mean, I think the thing about Canlit that Canlit itself doesn't like to admit is that it does have this thread of fantasy and fabulism running through a lot of it. Like, there is a really gothic feel in a lot of Canlit. There is, I don't want to use the term magical realism because that's very specific to a particular literary tradition.
I hear that evoked, and I'm never comfortable with it.
Exactly. So fabulism is as a kind of general catch-all, or slipstream maybe, for like that weird liminal interstitial gray zone between the fantastic and realism. So yeah, I feel like that's there anyway. And I was reading a lot of Canlit through my master's. And it's something it's a style I really do like, actually. I like all of that kind of gothic sublime in the like most literal sense of it's really beautiful and really scary at the same time. So I feel like, yeah, that's kind of infused itself in too.
Do you find that there, as far as trying to find a market and an audience, that there is pushback? I know all I can think of is Kari Marin's song about Canlit, where, you know, because ennui is witty. Where yeah, the whole sort of point is that there's no interest in speculative fiction, in the fantastic. You have to be dying alone on the prairies, and someone has to have a pie.
Yes, you can do that with the fantastic, though. It's interesting. I think because especially for short fiction, I mostly sell to American markets.
Oh, okay. Well, that works as well.
And they seem to really dig it, actually. I think it's like just different enough that they're like, whoa, that's cool. It feels different. I swear there is a different kind of sensibility and approach, I think, between Canadian and American fiction.
I'm getting some snarky comments from my wife about Margaret Atwood now. So
she writes speculative fiction. Hi,
well, right, but didn't she push back against being defined as science fiction, or
she
like
did at first, and I think she's since softened a little bit. I'm not going to go there. I don't want
That's
to
fine.
take on
My
Margaret
one
Atwood.
interaction with Margaret Atwood was being yelled at my bookstore by her because the copy of The Hobbit that she wanted to purchase was not on sale, as she was led to believe, and it was a thing.
She was looking for The Hobbit, was she?
Yes, she was.
Fantasy. Interesting. Yeah, no, Americans seem to dig it. And even in Canada, I've had some success. I mean, my play Six Stories Told at Night was in the Fringe last year.
Oh, talk about that.
Yeah. So Six Stories Told at Night was originally a podcast, unsurprisingly.
Fair.
Because it's me. And it was cool. It was kind of a framing narrative of a young woman trying to find her friend who's gone into the fairy realm. And then I had 6 fairy tales interwoven through it. So it was originally funded by the Ontario Arts Council as an audio drama, like a one-woman audio drama. And then it got into the Toronto Fringe Festival last summer. So I adapted it from being a one-woman audio drama to a 3-person stage play. And it went, and people seem to like it.
How did that process go? Because I mean, I like having now done one-person audio dramas and podcasts. You know, there's a sort of an intimacy and kind of a strange acting of sort of acting by yourself to take that and then not only to put it on a stage, but then to expand it to multiple people. That has to have a really stark contrast.
Yeah, I think the spirit was the same. It was the same in general in terms of plot and character, but they're 2 obviously different mediums, and it's almost like what I imagine translated between languages must be.
Oh, okay.
Where some things didn't quite work on stage, so they had to be changed up. Or vice versa, things that you really can't do when it's just one person talking into a microphone, you can maybe get away with when it's a more visual experience and when you have other people to help out. I sat down, I printed out the original manuscript for the audio drama beside me, and I just retyped a lot of it. So there's no copying and pasting, which meant that every line had to be considered before it went in.
And were you also putting in sort of stage directions as well, or were you going to leave that to the acting and directing?
I put in some. I'm really bad at stage directions, though.
It is an art. These stage directions. I have
chased by a bear.
Precisely. My favorite was I did an adaptation of, it was a stage adaptation of a movie, but the stage directions were, I love this movie. It's got some amazing dialogue. It's really stark and like grim. The stage directions were some of the most purple prose. Like the descriptions of characters and how they behaved was so like, what on earth am I reading?
And see, I feel like I'm completely the opposite, where they're very stark. They're very bare. It's I don't know. My approach as a playwright is kind of, I don't know, it's not my job. Like,
I don't know what the stage looked like.
The director or the actors can figure that out.
When we did a production of Terry Pratchett's Mort, and right at the beginning, they talked about how like their stage directions and their like assumptions were that you had no budget. So they're like, if you can think up really fun, expensive things, then you can have the creativity to go along with it. But here, use a broom and a strobe light. There you go. That's your
Love
ports.
it. Love it. I should do that. It was a really cool experience translating it from one to the other, though. I think, if I'm going to be completely honest, I think the stage version was stronger. Partly because I'd already written it once.
You essentially got a chance for a second draft.
Yeah, so I could take another whack at it, which was helpful.
And was that your first real time doing like writing for the stage, or have you done that prior?
I'd done that before. So in high school, I had a play in the Sears Ontario Drama Festival, which is no longer the Sears Ontario Drama Festival. I don't remember who's taken it.
Okay, some mega corporation, presumably.
I mean, I hope so, because they have money, and it's a good festival. And then actually, this was the first time that I was like, whoa, maybe I can actually do this writing thing. So in grade 12, our big school play was going to be Dracula. And the drama teacher, who was one of my favorite teachers, came and said, yeah, so we're going to do Dracula, but I don't like any of the existing stage adaptations. So can you and this other girl like write a new one?
Just, have it on my desk.
Yeah, so they told us at the end of grade 11, so we had the summer, and then like a little bit of September, October for rewrites and things. And then that was our school play in the spring.
Wow.
And that experience, yeah, that was the first time I was like, okay, maybe this is a real thing that I can do. Because people are commissioning me for stuff.
And already,
yeah.
so even that was sort of adapting. So you've got this nice, pipeline of taking existing works and figuring out how
Totally.
to put them in 3 dimensions.
Yeah, exactly. And then like all my work for Black Creek Pioneer Village, like there was a lot of, we didn't have a stage, but there was a lot of theater work.
Let's talk about that, because that is definitely one of the most fun parts of your very storied career that I know folks would like to hear about. Tell us just what is Black Creek Pioneer Village and what
this
you
will
did
also
there.
become relevant later, won't it? So Black Creek Pioneer Village is a living history museum. So it's got 40 historic buildings from the 19th century in southern Ontario, arrayed on a 30-acre site. And people who are employed there dress up in period costume and do period trades in these buildings. So it is a museum. We also have, in addition to an extensive artifact collection, like animals and heritage plants, people.
Y'all got some gnarly turkeys there. I was impressed by the wattles and some of those things.
We do. It's true. So yeah, if you've been to something like Colonial Williamsburg or I don't know, Mystic Seaport or Old Sturbridge Village, it's very much that same thing. Yeah, and I worked there for 8 years. It was a time.
What drew you to that? Was a love of history that made you go out there? Were they just hiring and you needed, a summer job? What brought you out to the village?
Originally, I did need a summer job. So they had a position called theater programmer. So it was partly doing monologues and partly running programs in character. And the character that they wanted me for was Peter Pan.
Historical Canadian figure, Peter Pan.
That's right. They were doing some theme that summer. It was Timeless Tales. It was like Victorian children's lit. So they had Alice in Wonderland and Peter Pan and like Anne of Green Gables. Someone else. Cinderella. I was like, it was something random. It was anyway. Yeah, it was a weird themed summer. They didn't do it again after that. But I was like, wait, I can write and perform for children in this pastoral bucolic setting. That sounds like a thing I'd like. And then I got there and they were like, yeah, so Peter Pan. It's like, okay,
here are the green tights, have fun.
Yeah, basically. But I was like, this is my destiny. Peter Pan is like my Patronus. So yeah, I did the summer, I did all the performing and the writing. I fell in love with the village itself. And so when my contract was up in September, I basically went and said, hi, I would like to stay, please. And then I didn't leave for 8 years. But it was cool. I got to do a lot of different things while I was there. So I did the regular just interpretation in costume, showing how to make cookies over a fire or how to pierce tin. I don't know. I did a lot of weird stuff. And then eventually we got an actual theater department in the village. So the history actors took 19th century real Torontonians and created monologues and scenes and short plays about them and then performed them. So it was kind of what I'd started out doing, but in a much more structured and rigorous and intentional kind of way. Yeah, it was a good time.
Excellent. We actually had some pre-written questions that tie into this from some of our folks. Thomas wants to know, what is your favorite beer? And I want to know how that relates to what you did in Pioneer Creek Village.
Cool. My favorite beer. I like stouts. I like stouts a lot. Porters too, but like I'm very much into the dark beers. Dieu de Ciel, which is a brewery in Quebec, has a really lovely beer called Aphrodite, which is a coffee stout. It's real good. It's real strong. So we have to be careful with it. But it's this lovely roasted dark thing like me. A little sweet, a little bitter, very dark. It's a good beer. But yeah, I got into beer actually at Black Creek as well because we had a functioning historic brewery in the village. So I just somehow got my fingers into everything while I was there.
I mean, hopefully not too much fingers into the beer making because that can get pretty hot.
Yeah. Well, it only takes one time and then you're good. Yeah, but we made our own beer there. So I was never involved with the actual production side. But we did tours and guided tastings. I wrote their blog for a while. Yeah, and I learned a lot about beer and how to taste beer.
That's a very useful skill. Here in rural Ohio, I discovered that a lot of my friends are like a lot of my dad friends are in like the craft beer scene. So like there's there is always interesting bottles with like like old olive oil bottles with some strange brown liquid in it, or different kind of growlers. And I'm like, I don't know what's in here, but I'm having a good time.
How is the craft brewing scene in rural Ohio?
I mean, I'm enjoying it, but I don't really have a lot of standards. I'm not an IPA guy, and so I'm happy that things seem to be moving away from like the more hoppy IPA sort of stuff. Like so, So I'm very selfish in that regard.
Stouts, porters, browns, but I guess maybe this is just me not knowing rural Ohio. I would have thought it would be a lot of, I don't know, Miller Lite. Coors.
Well, again, these are guys wanting to make these are guys making their own stuff,
right?
They're
making their own.
That's what I'm saying. Like these are like my dad, cool. Craft like beer nerds, going
like really into, DIY. Okay.
Yeah. No, that's what I'm talking about. As far as like
fun time.
I'll go over and they'll have this like rigged together system with plastic buckets, and they're like, "Don't touch that; it'll explode."
That's awesome. That's cool. Do you have like beer club?
Yeah. Oh yeah. There is definitely a brew club nearby, and the Venn diagram of friends of mine who are in beer club and friends of mine who play Dungeons and Dragons with me, darn near overlaps.
I love it. That's really cool.
Another question we had was, are you familiar with composer Arvo Part? And if so, what do you think of his work?
I am familiar with Arvo Part. We did his setting of the Bogorodice Dievo at our service of lessons and carols this past Christmas.
Oh, dang.
Yeah.
Some deep KT Bryski cuts coming from the crowd.
I really liked it.
Yeah.
I had a great time. I like it. I sometimes write to his stuff.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah. Like I'll just have it on in the background. Yeah, I enjoy his work.
Very nice.
It's very modern.
One of the results of your time at the park is something that I got to involve myself in, which was one of your more interesting podcasting projects. Should we call it?
Sure.
What can you tell the fine folks about Coxwood and what went down at Coxwood?
Coxwood History Fun Park?
Yes, the very same.
Yes. So this was an audio drama that originally started as a project during my MFA, like as a school project, and then took on a life of its own. Good God. So it was kind of a sitcom set at a museum that was totally not Black Creek. It just had the same layout and general interpretive plan.
Sure.
And,
it's like IKEA. These things all sort of seem the same.
Yeah, totally. But so not Black Creek. Except also terrible and horrible, fantastical things happened. Like there were ghosts and witches and a groundhog uprising.
A groundhog uprising? Why, that sounds fascinating. Tell me more.
Yeah, so at Black Creek, we've got all these groundhogs that live on the site, and they have their own network of tunnels under a lot of the buildings, and so they'll pop up occasionally and look around and then vanish. And so there was a running joke that, they're going to take over one day. Now, Coxwood is not Black Creek, of course. So at Black Creek, they never actually tried to rebel and take over. But Coxwood is not Black Creek, so they totally did. And eventually their uprising was crushed when our protagonist offered to build, what did she do? A scale model of the park that they could use for their own purposes on the forbidden lot of doom. I made a lot of this podcast up as I went. Most of it was not plotted in advance.
Is that usually your writing style, or do you tend to try to like really know where you're going?
I generally have a loose outline, right? So I need a roadmap. I don't need to know every stop along the way, but I need to know the basic landmarks between me and the end. But with Coxwood, it just went. It just went.
Well, and so again, full disclosure, Katie was very kind and asked me to be a part of this project as one of these groundhogs. And I remember we had some back and forth about the voice and my particular voice characterization choices.
Yeah, I liked your voice, though. I think I always liked it.
I feel like I the recordings I sent over were a lot more demonic than maybe you had originally intended.
No.
Is it always that demonic? Okay, good. Oh, good.
I think Coxwood can't be too extra. That was the beautiful thing about it. But also, okay, so it was totally absurd humor, right? So the wonderful thing about that, and the wonderful thing about not plotting a lot of it in advance, was that it did have its own internal logic that was actually very consistent. But it was very much that improv thing of say yes to everything, which made it great to get out of certain plot things, or a few times when characters needed to be recast. It was really easy to just lampshade it and say things like, "Oh, why is your voice different?" And the character could respond, "Because I'm a ghost. I can sound how I want." And then it's never brought up again. That's what we're doing.
We're having, yes.
I was gonna say the whole improving the entire thing pretty much was great. It was 9 episodes long. It was fine until about episode 6. And then it was like, okay, now I need to, all of these things that I threw in because I thought they were funny, we now need to somehow towards a coherent ending.
We're having some requests from the audience to hear the voice of the groundhog of Rodney. And I did manage to pull up the old script. Now you have to go and actually listen, because I think you did tweak the voice. I think you like raised the pitch up when it actually went.
No, I thought it was funny. I thought it was really funny the way it was, so I left it.
That was our conversation. Now I remember what
the conversation was. Should I pitch it up? And I was like, no, because that's what people would expect with a rodent. I was like, no, actually, I think it's really funny.
So I
groundhog with a really deep voice.
Just delivered voice like, "We will dance at our scale model fun park with your skull for our drums."
Yes, that was the voice. That was it.
So there we go, guys.
I'll play a flute carved from your thigh bone. Rodney was really violent.
Well, it's no fun to have, your pristine wilderness suddenly, trammeled over with historical recreations.
Yeah, we'll go with that.
But you'd done work though. I mean, well, I remember being very impressed by the way you were promoting some of your work by getting friends together to like make podcasts, make sort of a collaborative audiobook versions of your stories. How did that enter your mind as a thing to do?
I guess I'd seen a lot of it. So when I was 17 or 18 is when I first discovered podcasts. And that was during a period when a lot of the early podcasters were doing massive full cast audiobooks. So a lot of these indie authors had novels that they were releasing via podcast, and they were getting all their friends who were also doing the same thing to voice on it. And it was great because you could kind of leapfrog from one to the next of, oh, hey, this author who voiced this character that I really like also has a book out. I'm going to go check that out. And then, hey, through that I've discovered this author, so I'm going to go see what they're doing. So that was, I'm going to sound like old Mabel, but back in my day, the bad old days of like 2010, that's what people were doing. And so in a funny way, that's how I grew up in podcasting. I think it makes a lot of sense because A, it builds a really lovely community, and B, you do get that effect where everyone gets promoted. Not just you, but also everyone taking part in it.
Well, and it's so fascinating because I got into podcasting listening to podcasting, the sort of the mid 2000s, and all the stuff I was listening to was either like game reviews or comedy podcasts. Like I didn't discover fiction. Night Vale was probably my first sort of,
It was
quasi-fiction podcast.
it was for a lot of people. Oh yeah, this is like if Night Vale was set in a museum. There you go.
Yeah.
That was the actual pitch. You're not alone in that, and it's interesting. So I think I got into podcasts. I feel like I just searched like writing in the iTunes bar. So the first thing that came up with this podcast called The Writing Show, which was fine. But then the second podcast that came up that I actually stuck with was a little show called I Should Be Writing, which some of your listeners may or may not be familiar with.
I remember that, yeah.
I loved it. So Mur Lafferty was the one who was doing that show, and she's still doing it in a different incarnation. Ditch Diggers now with Matt Wallace, and she was heavily involved in that community. So she was running promos for some of these audiobooks, and they were cool, man. They sounded like movie trailers. So you'd go and you'd find them. So she was my gateway into it. She actually also ended up being the person who convinced me to go for my MFA. So
wow, dang.
Yeah, no big. Yeah, so it really all started with I Should Be Writing in some ways.
That's amazing. Well, I mean, it's been so fascinating because I've been addicted to podcasts for years and years and years and years. And then only in this last year, because DJ, a fellow Torontonian, asked me to be a part of his audio fiction podcast, Moon-Based Data Out. And sort of through that ushered me into the world of audio drama podcast, which like I had no idea was as huge and as expansive and as such a community.
And as old. That's the thing. I feel like we have this conversation every 2 years. Not you and me, but like the world has this conversation every 2 years of, did you know that fiction podcasts are a thing? And every 2 years ago, you realize that the first fiction podcast was released in 2005? Like, I was late to the game coming in like 2012. I was on the end of that first wave of golden age podcasters. Also, there's not just like audio dramas. It's also a means of distribution for a lot of magazines now, right?
Well, I mean, I knew that Podcastle and Pseudopod and those networks were out there, but I guess I had seen them for some reason.
Have you read for Podcastle?
I have, in fact, read for both Pseudopod and Podcastle.
I have an in with the editor.
And so like those are always in there, but I talk about being on YouTube. I talk about the fact that like it's like being in these little tide pools. And you feel like your tide pool. Oh, I know the community. I know these guys. I know this. Like I kind of have the shape of who's a big fish, who's a little fish. And then like every now and then you get sort of scooped out and dropped into a different tide pool, and it's either way bigger or way stranger. And you're like, I had no idea this was here. Like I have never heard of this person who has 800 million followers. Like we're presumably doing similar things. It's so remarkable. And that was the exact same thing that happened with suddenly kind of being in the audio podcast world and the the drama world. DJ's off in Australia, and he had me take over the Monkey Man official Twitter account, and I think he might be regretting that. But it's so fast. It's being on Twitter messes with your brain. Being on social media does weird stuff to you. And so I'm so used to my particular feeds, my Lehman feed, my Lovecraft feed, and so to suddenly now see Monkey Man's feed, which has become, because of Moon-Based Data Out, has become very based in audio drama and podcasts. Like I'm like, oh wow, people are really nice on the internet.
Yeah, often.
This is a much fluffier, sort of kinder subset than I'm used to. The much more like harsh, screaming into the void political Twitter that I usually hang out in.
Yeah.
I've been having fun just sort of going in and giving my fun moon facts. So
hey guys, yeah, I like that analogy of different tide pools. I think
and again, because of the way things evolve, I think it's a very apt, strange, moist comparison.
Definitely, it's very salty. Yeah, and I think it is very easy to think, okay, well, this is kind of the limit of the world. And then you're dropped into a completely different one. And you can kind of see where they overlap sometimes. Like, I think just like actual tide pools, there's sometimes that trickle that will flow between them. And I find those bridges and those trickles very interesting. Like seeing the interconnections between communities that at first glance would seem very disparate. So, yeah.
No, very true.
Cool. I can send, do you need Rex for audio dramas? Because I love.
Look, sadly, because I no longer commute to work and I don't walk the dog as much, like the amount of time I spend, like there was a time I think I had 12 to 20 podcasts on my feed.
Yeah.
That time, and also most of the podcasts I like have swears, and I spend a lot of time around small children.
That's true.
So that also limits my time.
Yeah. I guess it would.
But while I may not have time, our listeners probably do. So can you give us some of your top 5 of podcasts that you recommend for folks out there?
Cool. Campfire Radio Theater does really cool stuff. That's John Ballantyne. The Drabblecast. I think they're on hiatus again, but they have a whole archive of, again, really, really cool stuff. The Escape Artists. So that's that family we were talking about earlier of Podcastle, Escape Pod, Pseudopod.
Is that their official name, Escape Artists? I've just given the full
that's the umbrella, yeah. So under the Escape Artists is Podcastle, Pseudopod, Escape Pod, and also a Cast of Wonders now.
Oh, very nice.
Cast of Wonders is the YA
branch. Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yeah. That was 3. Ooh, if you like steampunk. The series is finished, but the stuff is all still there. The Ministry of Peculiar Occurrences, Pip Ballantyne and T. Morris. It's rollicking good fun. I may have a story or 2 in there too. Yeah. Coxwood, obviously.
Obvious. They already had that written down. That's okay.
Obvious, yeah. Yeah, you can.
Are we ever going to see more Coxwood? Are you going to bring that back? Willy Wonka up the old factory?
Here's a cautionary tale for you children. After the first season came out, everyone kept saying we want a second one. I was kind of like, I don't know, it was a lot of work, and I think I moved on, so I don't know, no. But they kept asking. So last year, when 6 Stories was a fringe show, we did a GoFundMe to cover the cost of producing a stage play, because it's a little bit more expensive when you have a real set and props and costumes and stuff. So as one of the stretch goals, I said, fine. Our ultimate stretch goal is if we hit this ridiculous number that we're never going to hit anyway, I'll do Coxwood season 2. Because it's a ridiculous number. We're never going to make it. I'm going to be off the hook, and also be off the hook because I'll be able to say, look, guys, I tried, but y'all didn't fund it, so leave me alone. And then we made it. And we hit this ridiculous number that I'd picked. So that was a thing that happened. I am genuinely actually very excited to go back to Coxwood. I like to grumble and make it sound like a cautionary tale, but I was pretty pleased with the way it worked out. I swear it's happening. It's been I never said when it would happen.
That's the other cautionary tale, folks. Look for the deadlines.
It will happen though. I do want to get it out. I have a general idea of the thrust of the plot this time. Again, I'm not going to plan very much because I didn't the first time.
Well, that'd be betraying the original vision.
Yeah, I have a general idea of a main plot thing I want to explore. And I think it will be interesting on a few levels though, partly because I've now left Black Creek. So my relationship to museums is very different now. And also it's been a really long time. Some of the original actors, I'm not in touch with anymore, or they don't do voice acting anymore. I've made new voice acting friends. So it's going to be interesting. I think it'll be a weird but cool mix of stuff from the original and then new stuff. Because it's been 5 years. I'm in a very different place in my life now.
That's very cool.
Yeah.
What else can folks be looking forward to coming out from you?
Well, as we mentioned at the beginning, I'm in an anthology that's out now, actually. So Bracken Magazine is a really cool fairy tale, tales from the woods, kind of lyricism, literary fantasy magazine. And they've just put out an anthology from their first 5 issues. And I have a story in it. It is kind of a creepy vampire ghost story that touches on grief and family angst. This is the other Canlit thing. It's all the family angst. That's what I do best.
And there's a lot of cold in that as well, which I think falls under.
I
the
also
Canlit
mostly
category.
write things set in the winter time.
It's good to have a theme.
Yeah, cold, angsty families. That's my jam.
Excellent.
I also have another cold, angsty fairy tale coming out in July with Augur magazine. Hi, Guinness. That's my cat.
Hello, Guinness.
Hello, Guinness. If you haven't checked out Augur magazine yet, you really should. They're based in Toronto, and they do like dreamy, slipstream, fabulism stuff. So very much up my alley as a reader and a writer. And they are also super Canadian. They're funded by the Ontario Arts Council. Again, they're based here in Toronto, and they're really interested in, Canadian authors and Canadian fiction. So,
do you see a general trend of where sort of Canadian fiction is sort of heading? Like, because I know that, as someone who worked at the bookstore in Canada for, a number of years, it can be both sort of protective, like Canadian lit, like, to very much distinguish itself from whiter, bigger American, sort of behemoths. But also there was sort of that fear that it was being too kind of closed off and insular. What kind of way do you see that it headed?
I can only speak from my one little tide pool of being much more on the speculative side, but also a very specific subset of that speculative side. Like very much the SIFWA, like Science Fiction Writers of America, CanCon, that kind of crowd. Like I'm not really into the indie scene as much. I think they're cool. That's not what I do.
Sure.
So speaking from that one very narrow little tide pool, I feel like there is a very quiet Canadian invasion going on in speculative fiction. There's a lot of really cool Canadian authors doing a lot of really cool things right now. So people like Kelly Robson and Rich Larson and Kate Hartfield and Derek Kunskin. Like you start to look at the names on some of the, like the Nebula and the Hugo's list, and start like that's a lot. Like Canada's representing really, really well. Podcastle, like Jen Albert is Canadian. She's one of the co-editors. So yeah, I feel like we're making our presence known.
In that very quiet Canadian way.
In a very quiet Canadian way. Oh, Amal El-Motar is Canadian. Like, I feel like every time I turn around and think of someone cool, I'm like, oh yeah. It's like with movie stars. Like, yeah, you guys know, like, Ryan Gosling's Canadian. He's really cool, guys. I feel like we're doing that, but with spec fic now. So yeah.
Very nice. Exciting.
Yeah.
And if folks want to follow you online or find out more about your work and what's coming out, where can they go?
They can visit me at www.ktbryski.com. And I'm on Twitter mostly, more so than anything else, as @KT Bryski.
And do you have a warm, fuzzy Twitter, or like me, do you have a screaming, howling into the void Twitter right now?
My Twitter goes back and forth. Something that is warm and fuzzy and howls into the void at the same time is my cat's Twitter, which you can also check out @Guinness is a cat. He has strong opinions about things and also a really derpy face. So
two things that are always helpful in maintaining a brand online.
For sure. So yeah, if you're looking for warm and fuzzy howling, you can check out him. You're looking for general whimsy and frolicking, and occasional dark fairy tale stuff, you can come check out me.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Katie.
Thank you.
Thank you to everyone following along in the chat. This has been Ask Lovecraft After Dark, a sister program to Ask Lovecraft. If you'd like to find out more about Ask Lovecraft, you can go to asklovecraft.com. If you'd like to be part of these live conversations, shoot your questions out to our guests, you can join the Ask Lovecraft Appreciation Society over on Facebook. If you really love this show, you want to keep the lights on, want to keep me traveling around the world, you can go to patreon.com/asklovecraft. If you'd like to see me howling into the void, you can go to follow me on Twitter @Lehman Kessler. And if you want to find out about live shows, things that are upcoming, you can go to lehmankessler.com. Speaking of audio dramas, I should in fact plug the Voice from the Darkness audio drama that just dropped from a whole bunch of us who used to be in the channel Awesomeverse and are now sort of left to our own devices. And what do we do with our own devices? We create fun, spooky, haunted mansion audio dramas, and Lovecraft gets to do some very fun things. Go check that out. That was a lot of fun to be a part of. A huge thanks to Lewis for organizing that, and for the 2 or 3 dozen producers and filmmakers and actors who came out to be a part of that whole endeavor. That was a lot of fun. Thank you to everyone for including me on that. This has been, once again, Ask Lovecraft After Dark. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you all for being in the chat. And thank you so much, Katie, for coming on. This was a blast.
Yeah, this was great.
All right. Well, we will look forward to finding out what Mischief Guinness is getting up to. I'm about to go follow that Twitter right now.
Excellent.
Bye, all.